This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. This evening we are at the MeCAHT conference down here in Cape Town, and we'll be interviewing Anna Bach, the pioneer of MeCAHT. Anne, you are the pioneer of this wonderful campaign against human trafficking. What is your vision for MeCAHT?
Well, my vision for media campaign against human trafficking is that every single nation in Africa will be saturated with anti-trafficking materials, whether it be film, videos, print, whatever avenue we have to run campaigns in every country in Africa, and also to reach people with the love of Jesus, to offer the powerful gift of salvation and deliverance through the blood of Jesus.
How did this vision come about? Why media?
Yes, I like that question. Why media? Media because I have a media background. And basically, I felt God was saying, whatever you have as a skill is what I'm going to use to send my message across. So I just laid it before the Lord, and I ever since we've been using films to campaign against human trafficking and to really, really create awareness.
So you've studied film, you've studied media, and now God has used you to produce movies and actually, reach out through a movie. How has that eliminated or assisted alleviating human traffic epidemic?
When I first started off, all I wanted to do was to preach the gospel. I just wanted to be an evangelist, and my mom actually forced me to go into media. So when I went into media, I discovered that actually media can give me an inroad into places that if I go as an evangelist, people will not accept me. So I started using film because I just go, I say, I'm a filmmaker. We just have a film to premiere. They go, yeah, let's see the quality. If they like the quality, they open the doors, and voila, you've got a film full of messages. And that's how we've been able to penetrate different places.
I want to thank you for what you are doing. I cannot express my gratitude or just, my enormous love for what you are doing, because I know that many lives has been saved and many lives will be saved through you and through your team and through this powerful ministry. And I want to salute you for making a difference and demonstrating the love of God. There's a little slogan that says, no matter what the cost, I'll go. Yes. And it's not easy, I know that, but with the power of God, He enables us to do all things.
Jaco, you're welcome to South Africa and at the MeCAHT conference. Please tell our viewers who you are and what you do back home in America.
Man, I don't like talking about myself.
Would you do it for me, please?
I will. I'd rather talk about the topic. Yeah, there's a little bit of an American twang, but I'm a South African. I was born and raised in Joburg, and I love Cape Town, Simonstown, but yeah, I'm a film director, film producer, proud South African, living in Los Angeles and Dallas, Texas, both, traveling a lot with my wife, an American, and a little 8-month-old gift from God, little girl. But yeah, we're here tonight to talk about a really hard issue. We're here tonight to talk about human trafficking and sex trafficking particularly. And of course labor trafficking and all those things are related and it's all tied in, but sex trafficking and particularly of minors. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're so excited to have you. One more thing. The people are in high anticipation for your movie tonight. Do you want to give us a sneak peek into your movie tonight?
Yeah. If I may tell you quickly how it came about. My wife is a writer, and she writes for Hollywood studios. She was asked to write a book about a particular girl's story, and that book is published. But that catapulted us into this world of sex trafficking, and it was unbearable. And so prayerfully, God just kind of jolted me and said, listen, we actually halted a film and said we got to divert and make a film. So 8 Days is based and derived off of true stories, and it's inspired by actual events. So when you watch the film, these things really happen, and the people on screen have names. Of course, we don't name them, but it shows you the different forms of trafficking, and it's not a documentary by design. because kids don't watch talking heads. It's a feature film, which is controversial in itself to make a movie. And how do we show sex trafficking, but we don't show sex and we don't show nudity, you know? And so it was a very difficult movie to make. It was a movie where consistently the actors would ask for time out, you know, just we need a break. You know, it's emotionally very heavy and it hits home, you know, so. And it needs to. The film, people ask me, what do you want to accomplish with the film? And I want to disturb people.
I like that.
To action. And it does. It's a disturbing film. It is PG-13. It's rated. We had to fight to get it rated PG-13, not because of content, but subject matter. You know, because you don't want to think about a 12-year-old kid being forced to have sex 25 times a day. You know, and the youngest case I've been involved with, the girl was 2. You know, so U.S. Department of Justice, Homeland Security, United Nations, they're all involved. U.S. government's in the film. So it's a massive effort to just combat the crime. 80% of the funds derived from the film internationally go into safe houses, and we've been able to bless, say, 37 safe houses worldwide. And so that's why we're here tonight. Big, small, it doesn't matter. You know, we've blessed safe houses with 1 person. Or massive organizations, you know, like International Justice Mission or etc. Yeah. So,
Jaco, this is great. And I just have to say this. When we had a Skype meeting with you, we talked about the possibility, and actually I'm seeing it more a reality of having you in Nigeria. This is South Africa. We have Nigerians that have come all the way to attend this MeCAHT conference. We have people from about 10 countries represented at this conference. But the next stop is going to be Nigeria. Jaco, what do you say about your intended visit to Nigeria with this film?
You know, actually in Dallas, where I live, there's a massive Nigerian church, and I've got a lot of Nigerian friends. And my heart burns. 2 weeks from now, I'm in the Dominican Republic. And then we're in, you know, Ivory Coast. So where God takes us, we'll go. So we'll do this in Nigeria, but we got to do it right, you know. And I want to include the Nigerian government and the politicians. I'm very controversial. I went on national television in the United States, and I called politicians by name, and I said, listen, if you don't fight this crime, then you must be buying children, you know. And so, because there's no gray matter in this issue. Are you for selling kids for sex, or are you against selling kids for sex? There's no, I'm going to turn a blind eye or see no evil, hear no evil. You know, it's a black and white issue, you know. So anybody that watches tonight as well, you'll see I'll challenge them. I'll tell them, you're either going to do something or I'm going to assume that you're part of the problem, you know. So we need to go to Nigeria, and we need to get the authorities involved as well. But its power is always in the hands of the people.
We miss you. Oh, hey Reed, come say hi to Amber.
I used to think trafficking didn't really exist.
It's important that we know who Amber hangs out with. We just always want to make sure that she's safe.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even know you were friends with them.
This is Tyler. He's gonna be our driver tonight.
I was hoping that you could come with me.
She has never done this before.
If she hasn't turned up by tomorrow, we'll file the paperwork and we'll start a search.
I'm Heather Hayes. As you know, we've been following the heartbreaking story of missing teenager Andrew Stevens.
You leave, because I let you.
No one ever wakes up thinking they'll be kidnapped. This shouldn't happen here. Darkness. Monsters. I can't close my eyes or cover my ears anymore.
Stop! Please don't.
You what now?
I got nothing from the text.
You said it would be okay. What are you doing this? Where are you taking me?
I didn't know what was gonna happen to her, honest.
No! Mommy, no! No! Mommy, no!
I know my child.
Help me. We can go together.
Every life is worth saving.
Drew is lying.
It's your last chance.
I'll kill you and your family.
We're gonna find her. We're gonna find her.
What is the first word that comes to mind when we think about the South African Police Service? Corrupt. Number one. What are a few other words that we like to use to describe our justice system in general? Slow. Tragic. Trafficked. Oh, they're somewhere else. They're not actually present. Okay. So, my colleague who spoke just before me, she was speaking about bringing new systems. But in South Africa, we have an extremely broken system. And we're seeing the effects of that on a day-to-day basis. We have cases that come in every day. And do you know how few convictions we've seen of human trafficking in South Africa? And now that this law has been passed, are we going to see that change? Are we going to see justice for our victims? Because in the end of the day, that is what our fight is for, right? We're fighting for the justice of people who have been exploited. Okay, now, to look at the Prevention and Combating of Human Trafficking Act, as you've all been made aware, it came into operation on the 9th of August, so it's been in implementation for two months now. And as what we said this morning is that it'll still be a couple of months before we see the effects of the legislation starting to take place. So before we see people really understanding what's in this act and then how it really relates to them. Okay. So this is a very big document, as you see. And if I go through the whole thing, we're going to be here long after lunch, and you're not going to like me very much. So I want to just quickly highlight the key things that are relevant to us and how we can partner with our broken justice system to try and help be that key to the justice for our victims. The objectives of the Act, as are kind of laid out here, is to give effect to our obligations according to the Palermo Protocol, which we signed 15 years ago, for the prosecution of traffickers, prevention of trafficking, to provide services to victims of trafficking, to provide for effective enforcement measures, coordinated implementation, I like that, coordinated. The application and administration of the acts, including the national policy framework, and then combating trafficking persons in a coordinated manner. So quickly, before I get into the penalties and the actual meat, two very interesting things came to my mind when I was reading through the definitions. Now, a lot of us working in the field have come across this concept of debt bondage. Now, if you hear the typical story of a trafficking situation where somebody is promised a job abroad or perhaps from a rural community into a city, the trafficker often offers to pay for that person's transport. And then when the person arrives, the trafficker says, "You owe me the money now." Now, that in itself is not debt bondage. It's not illegal to get somebody to pay back a debt that they owe you. I mean, that's common business practice. We do that all the time. The definition of debt bondage, a person who intentionally engages in this means that the debt owed or claimed to be owed is manifestly excessive. All right, so, you know, the transport from Eastern Cape to Cape Town is not 100,000 Rand. And you can't say that that would be a reasonable debt that could be incurred through such a process. Secondly, the length and nature of the services that the trafficker would ask of the victim to pay back this debt, it is not defined in length or nature. So they don't tell the victim, and the victim doesn't agree, that this is the type of service I will do and this is how long I will be doing it for in order to pay off the debt. And thirdly, the value of the services, as reasonably assessed, is not applied towards the liquidation of the debt or purported debt. So that's to say, the victim works 2 months and seemingly the debt doesn't go down, or the debt increases because of fines, or the trafficker decides to pay the person 10 Rand a day for their services towards the debt. That's not reasonable compensation for the work that victim would have to do. So that's just quickly the actual definition of debt bondage according to the law, and this is the elements that you would have to look for in order to classify it as debt bondage. Right? What's very interesting is somebody can be prosecuted on forcing someone into debt bondage alone, outside of trafficking. So if somebody does this, they can serve a 15-year jail sentence in South Africa. Another interesting one was the abuse of vulnerability, which is now defined in the Act. And it's very interesting that that phrase has come up over and over again the last few days. So according to this definition, and I've highlighted the key sentence there in bold, is that any abuse that leads a person to believe that he or she has no reasonable alternative but to submit to exploitation. So if a trafficker can make someone believe that because of your financial situation, because you're in the country illegally, you don't have any other rights to be paid fairly, to be treated fairly. So you have no reason to, or any other option, than to submit to the situation that I'm putting you in. Such things are being a migrant, an illegal migrant, pregnancy, disability, drug addiction, being a child, social circumstances, or of course poverty or economic circumstances. Now the interesting parts. So what penalties are actually in place now according to the new Act? All right, first of all, which is the most exciting, is if you are found guilty of trafficking in persons. So you are a convicted trafficker of the crime that includes the 3 elements. Does everybody know what the 3 elements are? I'm sincerely hoping that has been covered. Yes, okay. So according to this definition, it's mobilization, means, and exploitation. Just slightly different terms than the international definition, but it's exactly the same concept. Interesting enough, exploitation of vulnerability falls under the means category, so a means of control over that victim. All right, so the penalty for that is life imprisonment or 100 million rand fine, which is very exciting. Unfortunately, this legislation can't be used retrospectively. So for cases that have happened before the implementation of the law, can't be filed or prosecuted under the law. One that I want to draw particular attention to is Section 23, which is the disclosure of information. So I'm sure a lot of people here in this room, they do work directly with victims. And you are exposed to very sensitive information. You know where that victim's staying, you know their name, you know which club they were rescued from. And if you disclose that information and that disclosure compromises the case, you can be charged. So we need to be very careful about what information we provide and to whom. Safe houses, do not put your address on your website, please. Do not tell people where your safe house is. Do not tell anyone the names of the victims. The only person who needs to know the name of the victim in writing is the investigating officer. Nowhere else should the name of the victim be made known. Not even to the prosecutor. They don't need to know the name of the victim. So that's just something, how is the Act relevant to us? We need to be careful, and this section really shows that.
I'm speaking to Kirsten Hornby of the National Freedom Network here at the Anti-Trafficking Conference in Simonstown in Cape Town. Kirsten, you've recently seen the report from Amnesty International suggesting that decriminalized prostitution in a nation would protect the rights, the human rights of men and women in prostitution. Do you believe that?
Well, Errol, I know that legalization of prostitution, it's been a long-going debate, and I think that there's still a lot more that we need to discuss, especially about these policies working in a South African context. Because I know that a lot of these reports are based on countries where prostitution is currently legalized, and perhaps because that country has a lot of very solid social structures that can support women that are working in prostitution, perhaps for them to exit, which I know is especially true in the Sweden case. Because we don't necessarily have those policies here in South Africa, it's very difficult to build the case that legalizing prostitution in South Africa will protect the rights of the women in the industry.
But, Kristen, they're talking about decriminalization of prostitution, which means the entire sex industry will become legal, which means the syndicates, the pimps, the brothel owners will all become legitimate business people. Do you think that is going to protect the rights of women trapped in prostitution?
Well, I think what you just said is a very clear indication of what could happen, is that it could turn pimps and brothel owners into legitimate businessmen. And I think that in no way will protect the rights of the women who work for them.
Katie, you saw the report from Amnesty International calling for decriminalizing the entire sex industry. as a way of protecting men and women, the human rights of men and women trapped in prostitution. For example, if they decriminalize prostitution or the sex industry, entire sex industry in South Africa, which means brothels, pimps, syndicates all become legitimate businessmen, how more difficult would it become to combat human trafficking?
Sure, it's a great question. Very interesting report that came out. So it's good to talk about it. I think what's key to know is as A21, we deal in countries where human trafficking happens, where prostitution is legal and where prostitution is illegal. So whichever country it is, we operate under that. And can I tell you that legalizing prostitution, legalizing the sex industry does not combat human trafficking. In fact, sometimes it can put a mask on it even more than what having prostitution as illegal does. So as what we would do as an organization, we operate in both countries. But I think that the real thing that it does is it actually starts a slippery slope of morality, where you're starting to say that actually it's legal to buy sex, where it's totally fine and a norm in society to do this. I think you're working on a very slippery slope of what eventually, is going to culminate in something maybe not so great in our country morally, breakdown of family system. I know that's something you're very positive about. But in terms of human trafficking, I don't think it's something that will help the situation at all. In fact, probably just put another layer of mask.
Now, just your experience in working with women at risk, women in traffic situations, are you convinced by the argument that if you decriminalize the sex industry, you can better protect the men and the women, especially the women, and there's children in the sex industry? How do you protect their human rights if everything is decriminalized?
I'm not convinced with that argument. Listen, I will reiterate it. If it does happen, we will work with it because that's what we do. But I'm not convinced that it does provide protection. What you must understand about human trafficking is that it's an organized crime. It's not opportunistic. So it's going to operate within those legalities and laws anyway. Within prostitution and sex trafficking, you are looking at you're exploiting vulnerability of women, children, girls, you're exploiting their vulnerability. By slapping a law on it, it's not necessarily going to change that. People can still be manipulated. People can still have their poverty circumstances and their difficult circumstances exploited. So, we need to look at the root cause. It's vulnerability. Making something like prostitution legal does not change that vulnerability, which makes people still able to be trafficked and exploited, even within the legal system.
Reverend Lauren Bethel from the United States, thanks for speaking to us here at the MeCAHT conference in Simonstown in Cape Town. You've obviously seen the report by Amnesty International calling for decriminalized prostitution as a means of protecting women and men trapped in prostitution. Do you think decriminalized prostitution is going to help women and protect them or the human rights in a decriminalized environment?
That's a really complex question, actually, because I don't think there's a simple answer. I definitely believe that most women in prostitution are victims and do not need to be criminalized. They need help. They are victims of exploitation of their vulnerability. However, so I wouldn't be for criminalizing the women who are in prostitution, but I think we need to criminalize the demand. We need to, if we're going to decriminalize, help women and actually do something about their victimization, then we need to be criminalizing those who are buying sex, because sex is not for sale.
Is it your experience then that if the sex industry is decriminalized, that means brothel owners, syndicates, pimps all become legitimate business people, that this opens the door to trafficking?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. But see, like I say, you can't have one without the other. You can't have decriminalization of women in prostitution without criminalizing all the perpetrators, whoever they are.
But if, for example, in South Africa, there's an organization calling for the total decriminalization of the sex industry. Yeah. How do we combat trafficking if we did that?
Well, we can't. We can't do that. I mean, that is the conundrum that people have put themselves in. Yes, we need to be, we have to totally look at it in another way. We have to flip the whole thing upside down and talk about the exploitation that it is. It is exploitation in one way or another, and any form of exploitation is not good for society.
So now moving on to Lauren. From a global scene, how would you say that these three are interconnected? Illegal migration, human smuggling, and human trafficking?
Well, the difference between all of them has to do with who pays, what is owed to if there is something that is owed to someone afterwards, how much freedom the person has once they arrive at the place where they are headed. So it's all about is there something owed. Human trafficking is about owing something to someone after they have reached a border. If they're smuggled or brought in illegally into a country, are they on their own or are they not on their own? And that's the difference between smuggling. Victims of trafficking can be smuggled, but do they owe somebody something afterwards? Then that's trafficking. And if they're kept against their will, that's trafficking. And so but that begs the bigger question. Has the person who has been smuggled or been brought over illegally, is that person, once they arrive in the country, vulnerable? Now, the vulnerability issue really is at the core of what we're all about. My definition of human trafficking varies from the legal definition, and I think mine actually goes along with what the Swedish law would have, that all prostitution is trafficking, that the trafficking equals the exploitation of vulnerability. It's and the motion, the movement, trafficking implies a movement. You'll hear me say this over and over, and if this quote sounds familiar because you've seen it in Nefarious, here I am. You have to know that the movement of trafficking, it implies a movement. Trafficking is a movement. The movement is from the vulnerability to the exploitation of that vulnerability, whether it's across borders or whether it's domestic. So the big question is, if they have arrived in a country but they don't owe somebody something for their movement, their exploit, for their migration, are they still vulnerable to being trafficked? What's the answer to that question? Yes, of course. So we've got lots of factors at play. Whether they do owe somebody something or whether they don't owe somebody something, they're vulnerable to being exploited. And so then we have to carry on from there and to decide what we're going to do about it, and that comes later, right?
How would you say these issues, as just been described, how do you say they affect South Africa and our society?
I think it affects South African society in a fundamental way because, you know, we've got to start at the most basic, and that is the family unit. When we look at South Africa, in South Africa currently, only 35% of children live with both biological parents. That means that more than the vast majority of kids are in dysfunctional, broken homes, single-parent families, and that is the root of most of the social ills in our country. So family breakdown affects all of these things. So young people are made vulnerable through family breakdown and then end up on the streets being sold into prostitution, into trafficking. So we've got to deal with the family first. But trafficking, prostitution fundamentally affects South Africa as a nation. It undermines the most vital institutions God has given us, and that is marriage and family. And when you undermine those institutions in any society, that society has no hope, no future.
Steve, I wanted to ask you, as a member of Parliament, what is the South African government doing about this?
We try to address issues relating to legislation, but similar to the Sexual Offences Act when it came to the decriminalisation of teenage sex, government realised that what it had been trying to do, and the Constitutional Court struck that down, was trying to act as a deterrent for children when actually we've got the dysfunctional families that Pastor Errol spoke about. So government, and instead of using the criminal law to send children that engage with consensual sex to jail, we realised that surely if the state is to play any role, it must come in the social development and not from a criminal justice perspective.
Changing gears a little bit, we focused on Europe and Africa. Now, Griselda, I'm going to put my question to you. As a South African, obviously a survivor of trafficking, you've obviously been on both sides of the fence. So the side of being in exploitation, but also now assisting people out of exploitation. How would you like fellow South Africans to respond to the issue of trafficking? And then I've got a follow-on question for that, but if you can answer that first.
Thank you very much. First, how does it feel being out there and speaking to other girls that is in trafficking? I think the most amazing part was for me my first trip to Nigeria, and when we went to Ibadan, where it was a whole community of a brothel. And the girls that I met, you know, you get taught in the system of trafficking and prostitution to be so confident and so stubborn. There's nothing of sort, like nobody can change your life. So your mindset is like that. But the girls that I met, I had to tell them what we used to do and describe some certain for them to get comfortable. And when they broke down and cried that you've made it, it was for me so fulfilling that there is a reason why we should continue to be out there. We should continue to give information more. And then again, on the other side, it's for me political. It's scary because when I was in the industry of prostitutes alone, we had a lot of political people with their hands in it, enjoying the exploitation. So then again, I mean, you know better as A21, like information is very important to us as the people that's doing it. And giving out the information, is it going to help the security of those that we're trying to help? And as a survivor in the past 6 years, it's been very hard because I have to be out there and say, you know, to the people that do NGOs and minister, it's hard for you too, because whatever you receive from us as survivors, it's so much to take in. And you go home, like last night, some of the outreach team had to cry in the car. So with me, it's more because yeah, I am, and I'm feeling exploited again. But it's something that I have to do. And then my mind would think about the girls in the streets, thinking exactly what I'm thinking as much as I'm out. The stigma of what society would say. Feedback from just doing advocacy around the situation on media. It's been great, and then it's also been bad. There's some stuff that's still out there about me. So it is hard, and you find that why would there still be a porn movie of myself out there after 6 years? Where does government draw the line on porn that encourages this? So it's not just every girl that would say, look, I would love to. And when the girl cried and said, you made it, she made me feel so, you know, like she knew what I was feeling at this particular point. Because when she said, you made it, it's like, you made it out of this, but obviously you're going to have to continue. So it's an amazing feeling. But when I look at the political side, I was like, why would government still continue with this whole porn going on? Do they know about it? Because when I see myself still in one, I get upset and wonder what's going on with the security of government.
Thanks for sharing so honestly. I think you've touched on something there, the stigma, you know, that comes with, you know, even being a survivor of trafficking. So what would the one thing that you would say to South Africans to respond to victims of trafficking? If there's one thing you could say, what would you say?
You know, 2 weeks in just being rescued, you don't want to see anybody. Yeah, you don't want to be around anybody. But I think it's the most important thing is trust. I don't know who you are. You can give me a badge that's written, you're the minister of whatsoever. I still don't know who you are. So that trust that the victim will seek for in your eyes, in your hands, in your body language. Once again, like Bruce said, it's such an important part of you as a Christian. You know, there's nothing more that I feel freedom when I'm amongst people that I know they're doing the purpose of God. And when you do the purpose of God, you just don't seek the wisdom to find it, but you seek that, God, give me that love, that when I'm standing in your presence, I can feel that hug. So that's what most of your 1 week victim, 2 day victim, then again, you find victims that's been massively, their bodies were used for drug. You know, some victims are told to swallow as much as you can because you need to get to the other side of the country. And not just swallow, but you need to take it so you don't have to look like a panic machine because you're a box of trafficking, your stomach of drugs. So you're going to meet the one that has been vulnerability, and then you're going to meet the one that just came up from 1 week of heroin in the system. And then again, trust. It's such an important thing that our Christians need to really work on, that when you do meet any woman of human trafficking, that surroundings of Jesus is around you, so you can, when you stretch your hand, she can feel it. There's nothing more powerful than that. Yeah.
Steve, I'm gonna direct my next question at you. Do you want to tell us some of the constraints that government faces in tackling just these issues? And feel free to go wherever you would like to with the question.
I have just sitting in such a sense of responsibility. When I hear the stories that are told around me, I have such a sense of, as a leader in the nation, of saying, I'm sorry that we haven't done more. Griselda, I'm so sorry. Because we've got to do more. And there is a calling, as William Wilberforce and as so many people, there's more we can do as leaders. And we were walking in our purpose and destiny. And it breaks my heart to see people struggling. But you are whole, Griselda. You're whole, and you're here on a panel, and everyone on television are going to be watching you. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you.
Sure, I know how much more at peace I feel when I know we've got men like this who are, you know, leading the way and speaking into what's happening in our country. Reverend Dr. Otto, I'm going to ask you, as someone from Cameroon, a scholar in Cameroon, and obviously your ministry is targeted at trafficked men. What do you see as the root cause of the problem of why these men are so easily trafficked?
I think amidst many causes of them easily falling prey, I think one of the greatest root cause is the economic situation back home, which is actually characterized by poverty. You know, it's the root cause. With no job opportunities even for graduates. You know, high taxation policy, a barrier, and a real deterrent to any commercial business venture. You know, these guys, they find life full of misery, hopelessness, and uncertainties. It's hard to think about.
Yeah, sure. That does paint a bit of a picture. It makes it easier to understand why someone might be lured more easily if that is what you're facing. A graduate even finding it difficult to find employment. So what do you think should be done? I know that's a big question to ask, but in your experience, what do you think can be done to even start addressing this issue?
Good governance can play the hat trick. But I bet you it's disheartening to know that, especially with countries within the Central Africa, one person wants to rule for more than 3 decades. What a shame. My country, the president is over 33 years now, since 82 as president. Then if you go back to maybe Gabon, ruled for over 40 years and handed down to the son. So sometimes I just get so worried and I begin to ask, we preach democracy. Do we really practice it? And I ask if they are ruling dynasties. Is it kingship or democracy? That somebody rules and hands over the power to the son by any means. So I think good governance can really play the hat trick.
So I know you've painted a bit of a picture, but do you think that this is the reason why men don't want to return home? You know, they get trafficked, say, to South Africa or Europe, do you think this is the reason why they don't want to go back?
One of the reasons also is, you know, sometimes for them to go back home empty-handed, it's a big problem. Because back home, before their travel, you know, some valuables would have been mortgaged to make ends meet, look for transportation, and, you know, maybe pay the masters and the mistresses, you know. So and all these valuables include land and landed property. And at one moment, the family is like, we need to pay back this money, otherwise our houses, our land will be seized. So it becomes difficult for them to go back home empty-handed. So that's a far-fetched point. They want to press on until they make it. And in some cases, some of them actually had their low wage earning jobs, but for this sake of greener pastures, they easily could make it out and thinking that they'll be better placed. So when they come and they see that out there is not that illusionary job opportunities they were thinking about, they don't find things going. Some come thinking that they'll come and find soccer teams and play good football and make big money out of it. When things are not moving, they can't even afford to go back home empty-handed because all is lost back home. And they keep thinking, what about my colleagues? What about my friends back home? They are certainly much more better than I left them. How do I go? How do I get myself reintegrated in the system? And with no changes from the top, as I said. One person there, on and on. I mean, you run out of what you can offer. So you're just going back to meeting the same situation, so you find it difficult. So some of them just keep struggling, and they promote these gambling houses quite well because they resort to gambling, soccer bet houses. You know, every day they spend a lot of money playing, gambling, and well, all the same, some do make it full time.
It's so interesting how different cultures respond to it differently. You know, we've seen with the Asian culture as well, that sense of shame is such a bondage that prevents people from going back home. I'd rather stay in my exploitation and slavery than actually go home because of the shame. Errol, what do you feel like the church's response to this, the stigma, you know, specifically what Reverend Dr. Otto was talking about?
I think the church is best positioned to deal with the issues of stigma, because you know, the Bible says Jesus started his ministry. The first thing he did, when he walked into the synagogue, he opened to the book of Isaiah 61, and he read, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives." That essentially is the responsibility of the church, is to set the captives free through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And because the church is not fulfilling that role as it's called to do, other people are trying to fulfill that role but are not doing a good enough job. I think the focus of the church is on a lot of things other than where God wants it to be. And that's why we're seeing so much dysfunctionality in society, so many families breaking down. You know, we got a report from the South African Medical Association recently that teen pregnancies in South Africa is off the charts, that the medical fraternity don't know what to do about it anymore. A lot of these pregnancies are perpetrated by the teachers in classrooms on the teenage girls. You've got this issue of middle-aged men, 40-year-old, 50-year-old men having teenage girls. They're the sugar daddies, and they buy them cell phones and give them money for clothes just so they can have sex with them, and it's married men. And our government is aware of all of this. They're aware of all of this. It's all happening. There's a lot of people in the church aware of this. Because, you know, welfare, taking care of the destitute, of the lost and the broken, is the responsibility of the church, not government. Government is not, it's not the duty and responsibility of government to look after the needs of people. It's actually the role of the church. And government is supposed to create the environment so that the church can operate freely and do what God's called it to do. And so there's a lot of hurting, broken people sitting in churches today, and people are unaware of them because we're so busy with other things. They're unaware of the broken, hurting people sitting in their church. So there's got to come a fundamental change in the way we do church in South Africa, and I believe only God can do that. It's put the focus where God wants the focus to be, to heal the brokenhearted, and to set the captives free. Jesus read from that Isaiah 61 in the beginning of his ministry, and I think he was beginning to set the tone for the role and responsibility of the church that he would birth in the earth. And Jesus birthed his church in the earth for a time such as this, for the broken, for the hurting. And we've lost track of that. And I think the role of NGOs, people like you, the more you bring this to the church, the more you're going to bring conviction. Because you can only ignore something if you don't know about it, nobody tells you about it. You can say, well, nobody told me about it, I didn't know. So it's your role and your responsibility to, people have to challenge their leaders. The only reason why a president can serve for 33 years or 40 years is because the people allow him to do that. The only reason governments can steal and loot the public funds is because the people allow them to do that. The only reason the church leaders can put their focus on building buildings and having fancy confidences and all of that is because the people allow them to do that. People allow them to do that. So what's happening amongst the people? Why aren't people rising up in this country, well, in their churches to begin with, and to say, look, we're not happy with what's going on here. There's a lot of hurting, broken people out there, and we want to deal with those issues. Forget the buildings, forget all the other things. Let's put our focus, our time and our energy where God wants it to be. Jesus called us to be salt and light to society, and I think we're missing it there. And the one thing I know about this God that I serve is He doesn't just transform you, He recreates you. As the Bible says, Griselda, that you are a new creation when you're born again by the Spirit of God. You're a new creation. So whatever's out there about you, porn films, that's not you. That's not you. That's the former you, but that's not you. It doesn't represent you anymore because you're a new creation in Jesus Christ. The Bible actually says that the old is gone and the new has come. So you're new. And our God looks at you today. You're precious, you're valuable to God, you're a new creation, you're righteous in the sight of God. No matter what anybody says about you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because God defines who you are. He says who you are. And He says who we are. And so, the people sitting in this room here today can change this nation. God never needs a majority. Just one of us with God is always a majority. God only needs one person. So the people, there's enough power and authority and passion and commitment in this room to change this nation. And we're unaware of it, that God is with us, God is for us. We're fighting a righteous cause. The cause is always Christ, and the cause of Christ is justice and liberty, and it's not in God's economy for people to be abused and exploited and neglected and all of these things. So we're doing what is on the heart of God. And so we must do it with more passion. Like I said earlier, if we can begin to speak this message, we can begin to challenge pastors. You don't have to be apologetic about it. You don't have to apologize because it's the Word of God. You go and you challenge your leaders. We challenge government. We challenge others. What are you doing and why aren't you doing it? This is the calling of God on your. How can you stand aside and allow women and children and men to be abused and exploited by pornography? The South African Law Reform Commission now has put out an issue paper on children on pornography. Why? It's a huge problem of younger and younger children being exposed to hardcore pornography. In our country today, and our children raping and abusing other children is a growing phenomenon. And we're carrying on like nothing is happening in this country. So more needs to be done, but it's got to start from our level. It's got to start from ordinary people, NGOs, people that's committed and passionate, and it will grow from that. So I want to encourage you and keep on encouraging you. God is on your side. There's a lot that is wrong in South Africa, but there's a lot that is right with South Africa. And a lot of what is right in South Africa is sitting in this room. And you, by the power of God and authority, just passion and commitment, you can change this nation. I believe it.
Lauren, I'm going to direct my next question at you. Again, referring back to Al Jazeera, they've reported that 2,000 have died in illegal migration into Europe. I'm sure the number is far higher, since then. And in Africa, I think about 156,000 fled to neighboring countries from Burundi because of the unrest. I know my question to you was about policies that should be in place, but I actually want to change it and ask you, what do you feel the role of the church is in response to this crisis, in African countries, but globally as well?
Yeah. I was recently attending a forum in Europe. It was church leaders from all over Europe and the Middle East who were sitting and listening to each other talk about what are we going to do about this refugee crisis, this refugee problem that we have coming into our country. And it started out, the first several leaders were citing statistics and talking about all the issues and all the problems and just feeling so overwhelmed. And then the mood shifted. And people started talking about the refugees coming into their churches. And then they started talking about how, some of these refugees are having dreams and visions of Jesus. And these are the people that we have prayed for years and years and years and years. And we have spent billions of dollars sending missionaries to them. And now they're coming to us. We don't have to be missiologically correct anymore in going in to minister to people who have very different cultures than ours. They are in our midst. And now we have the opportunity to meet with them, and they are transforming our churches. They are seeing Jesus in dreams and visions and coming to our doors and saying, who is this person that we're seeing? And some of them were saying, they're transforming our churches because some of these churches haven't seen Jesus in a long time. And so we need to take this crisis by the arm and see it as an incredible missional opportunity that we have. And are we going to accept that challenge, or are we going to shut our doors? And so the church has an incredible opportunity now. Whether or not they will accept the challenge or not is another question, but we pray. There are communities in the Middle East, churches in the Middle East, as well as in Europe, that are accepting the challenge. And amazing, amazing transformation is happening, not only of the refugees, but of them. So it's an opportunity in the middle of a crisis.
That's fantastic. I think we've had such a wealth of knowledge coming from this panel today. Honestly, it took a bit of a turn that's, more inspiring than I ever expected coming out of this panel. And just one common thought that I think came out is that our role as leaders, each one of us are leaders in our environments, no matter which environment we come from. And it is our responsibility to stand up, changing mindsets. What words are we speaking? Are we sowing fruit with our mouths, or, are we sowing destruction? And our founder, Christine Kane, preached a message very recently that's really resonated with me. And she spoke about in Numbers 13, there were 12 spies that went out. Every single one of them were labeled as leaders. Every single one of them were leaders. But because 10 leaders had a bad report that kept more than 1 million people out of their destiny, just 10 leaders. Caleb and Joshua were nothing different from those 10 leaders. They were all classed as the same. They just had a positive report. And, in this field of anti-trafficking, are we going to be the people with the positive report that lead people into their destiny, that lead our countries into their destiny with justice, or are we going to be the naysayers? So thank you, every one of you, for the input that you've given. I feel incredibly inspired, and I'm sure everyone does here today. So let's give them another hand, and thanks for being here.
That's our show for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. We value your comments and suggestions for the show. So please write to us at info@familypolicyinstitute.com. Please visit our website at familypolicyinstitute.com and subscribe to my weekly newsletter. This is my primary method of sharing critical information concerning faith, family, and religious freedoms in South Africa. You can also join our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Remember, the latest edition of Joy and Jeug magazines are available at retail stores across the country. Make sure you get your copy. Thank you for joining us tonight. God bless you, and remember, keep standing.